The recruiter laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not an awkward clearing of the throat, but a full laugh that echoed through the recruitment centre and made the two young applicants in the waiting area look up from their phones. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This isn't a shelter." The man standing at the counter said nothing. His clothes were worn but clean, his grey beard neatly trimmed despite the circumstances that had clearly weathered him. He was 63 years old and he had walked 4 miles that morning to reach this office. He had come to re-enlist. The recruiter, a staff sergeant named Hendricks, who had never deployed, was already turning away when the old man spoke. "I served 31 years. I'd like to serve again." Hendricks didn't even look back. "The age limit is 42 for prior service. You're done, old-timer. Go find a VA office." If this story moves you, comment the word "classified" below before you continue watching. Marcus Cole had not always been homeless. There was a time when his name appeared in briefings that never left underground rooms in buildings that officially didn't exist. There was a time when he had led men through terrain that still doesn't appear on any map, completing missions that would never be acknowledged by any administration. But that was before the divorce that cost him his savings, before the medical bills for his daughter's treatments drained what remained, before the contracting company he'd worked for after retirement went bankrupt, owing him 14 months of back pay. The descent had been gradual and then sudden, the way these things always are. One missed rent payment became 3. The storage unit where he kept his medals and certificates was auctioned off when he couldn't pay the fees. He had spent the last 8 months sleeping in a tent beneath an overpass on the outskirts of Fort Bragg, close to the base where he had once commanded respect from men who would have followed him into hell itself. The recruitment centre was quiet that Tuesday morning. Staff Sergeant Hendricks had been running this office for 3 years and had developed a particular disdain for what he called the sob stories. Older men who wandered in with tales of past glory, looking for a second chance or simply a warm place to sit. He had heard every variation. The economy had been rough, the wife had left, the pension wasn't enough. Hendricks had no patience for any of it. He had joined the army at 19, worked his way to staff sergeant through administrative postings, and believed firmly that success was simply a matter of discipline and proper planning. If these old men had failed, it was their own fault. He returned to his computer screen, already forgetting the grey-bearded man who was still standing at the counter. Marcus didn't leave. He stood perfectly still, his posture straight despite his years, a habit so deeply ingrained that he couldn't have slouched if he'd tried. He had faced interrogators in countries whose names were redacted from every report. He had held his position for 72 hours in a valley that the enemy believed was impenetrable, waiting for extraction that nearly didn't come. A dismissive staff sergeant in a strip mall recruitment office was not going to make him flinch. "I'd like to speak with your commanding officer," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but carried the kind of weight that made the two young applicants look up again. Hendricks sighed heavily and finally turned around. "Listen, I don't know what you think is going to happen here, but there's no waiver for your situation. You're too old. Your records, if they even exist anymore, are probably paper files in some warehouse. The modern army runs on technology you wouldn't understand. I'm doing you a favour by being straight with you. Now please, I have actual applicants to process." Marcus reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and produced a single piece of paper, folded into a careful square. He unfolded it slowly and placed it on the counter. It was a DD-214, his discharge papers from his official service record, the unclassified version that showed him as a master sergeant who had served in administrative and training capacities. It was not accurate, but it was the only document he had managed to obtain from the VA after months of navigating bureaucratic obstacles. Hendricks glanced at it with obvious disinterest. "Master Sergeant. Administrative. Great. You pushed papers. That doesn't change the age requirement." Marcus said nothing. He simply reached for the document to retrieve it, and as he did, the sleeve of his jacket rode up his forearm. Hendricks noticed it only because the fluorescent lighting caught the raised tissue at just the right angle. A scar, thick and irregular, running from the old man's wrist nearly to his elbow. But it wasn't the scar itself that made Hendricks pause. It was the pattern. 3 parallel lines crossed by a diagonal slash. The tissue puckered in a way that suggested it had been treated in the field, without proper surgical facilities. Hendricks had seen that pattern exactly once before, in a classified training module that he had been required to complete when he first took over the recruitment office. The module covered recognition protocols for personnel from units that officially did not exist. The scar pattern was a marker, the result of a specific injury protocol used by operators in the most elite tier of special operations to identify each other in the field when all other forms of identification might be compromised. The training had seemed absurd to Hendricks at the time, a relic of Cold War paranoia. He had never expected to actually see it. His face went pale. The young applicants noticed the change immediately. The confident, dismissive staff sergeant suddenly looking like he had seen something that frightened him deeply. Hendricks' hand moved involuntarily to the desk, steadying himself. "Sir," he said, his voice completely different now, stripped of its condescension. "I need you to wait here. Please, just wait here." He disappeared into the back office so quickly that he nearly knocked over a chair. Through the thin walls, Marcus could hear him making a phone call, his voice low and urgent. The words verification protocol and immediate filtered through. Then, more quietly, something that sounded like Washington. Marcus waited. He had waited in worse places, under worse circumstances. The young applicants were staring at him openly now, trying to understand what had just happened, why the staff sergeant who had been so dismissive moments ago now sounded genuinely alarmed. Marcus simply stood at the counter, his hands folded in front of him, his expression neutral. Whatever came next, he had faced worse. It took 47 minutes. Hendricks emerged from the back office looking like a man who had just received news that restructured his entire understanding of the world. He was followed by a captain, who must have been pulled from the main base, and behind the captain was a man in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested he had never been a civilian a day in his life. The man in civilian clothes looked at Marcus for a long moment, then spoke. "Sergeant Major Cole." It was not a question. Marcus met his eyes. That rank was never official. The man smiled slightly. "No, it wasn't, and neither were the 18 stars on the wall at Langley that exist because of operations you led. But they're there, and so are you." He extended his hand. "My name is Director Wilson. I run a department that you helped create, whether you know it or not. I've been looking for you for 2 years." Captain Reynolds and Staff Sergeant Hendricks watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded before them. Director Wilson explained, carefully and with obvious respect, that Marcus Cole's official service record was a fabricated cover story, designed to protect both him and the missions he had completed. His actual career had involved operations in 11 countries, the training of foreign special operations units that had gone on to become crucial American allies, and at least 3 instances of single-handedly preventing situations that would have resulted in significant American casualties and international incidents. The scar on his arm was a recognition marker used by a unit so classified that its existence was known only to a handful of people at the highest levels of government. When Marcus had retired, forced out actually due to injuries sustained on his final mission, his records had been sealed so thoroughly that even the VA had difficulty accessing them. The system designed to protect him had ultimately failed him. Hendricks stood at attention, his face burning with shame. He had laughed at this man. He had called him old-timer and suggested he find a shelter. He had dismissed 31 years of service that had protected American lives in ways Hendricks couldn't even comprehend. "Sergeant Major," Hendricks said, his voice thick, "I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give." Marcus looked at him with an expression that held no anger, only a kind of tired patience. "You didn't know. The system is designed so that you couldn't know. Don't carry it." But Hendricks shook his head. "No, I should have shown basic respect to a veteran, regardless of what I thought I knew. That's not about classification levels. That's about decency." Director Wilson had not come simply to identify Marcus Cole. He had come with an offer. The department Wilson ran had a training program that desperately needed instructors with real-world experience, the kind of experience that couldn't be found in any manual or taught in any simulation. The age restrictions that governed regular military service did not apply to contractors working in specialized training capacities. The pay would be substantial, the housing would be provided, and perhaps most importantly, Marcus would be doing what he had always done best, preparing the next generation to face challenges they couldn't yet imagine. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the tent beneath the overpass, about the meals he had missed, about the dignity he had lost piece by piece over the past months. He thought about his daughter, whose medical bills he might finally be able to help with again. And he thought about the young men and women who would pass through whatever program Wilson was describing, who would benefit from everything he had learned in 3 decades of service that the world would never know about. "When do I start?" he asked. Director Wilson smiled. "There's a car outside. If you're ready, we can leave now." Marcus nodded. He turned to look at the recruitment office one last time, the posters on the walls promising adventure and purpose, the young applicants who were still watching with wide eyes, the staff sergeant who would never look at a veteran the same way again. He had walked into this office that morning as a homeless man seeking any chance to serve again. He was walking out as something he had never stopped being, even when the world had forgotten, a soldier whose service mattered. 3 months later, Staff Sergeant Hendricks requested a transfer to a Veterans Affairs liaison position. He told his commanding officer that he wanted to spend his remaining years in uniform, making sure that no veteran ever fell through the cracks the way Marcus Cole had. He implemented new protocols at his former recruitment office, requiring all staff to treat every veteran who walked through the door with the assumption that their service record might contain more than what appeared on paper. The young applicants who had witnessed that Tuesday morning both enlisted. One of them, years later, would tell the story of the homeless veteran and the classified scar to his own recruits, passing down the lesson he had learned, that the person standing before you may have sacrificed more than you could ever know, and that respect costs nothing but means everything. Marcus Cole spent the next 4 years training operators for missions that would never be acknowledged, passing down knowledge that would save lives in places the public would never hear about. He reconnected with his daughter, helped pay for his grandchildren's education, and spent his weekends volunteering at a homeless shelter near the base where he now lived, making sure that others in his former situation knew that their service had not been forgotten. The scar on his arm faded slightly with age, but its meaning never diminished. It remained what it had always been, proof that some sacrifices leave marks that no paperwork can capture, and that true service is measured not in what the world sees, but in what it will never need to know. If you believe that every veteran deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they appear, subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.